Good to see you. No matter what.
Well, yeah, so yeah, there's actually...
Okay.
Thank you, Lucille, and I'd like to thank you for all your hard work that you've done with this. She is the interim president, or I guess voted president now, of the cultural 501c3. She heads it. And I'd also like to thank Tyler. It's amazing how history wants to evolve and move, and as we take all of this information from the past, it's great to have the opportunity as the Historical Society to have that past preserved and have our this vision taken hold of. And it really wouldn't be possible unless it was for Tyler and his crew and the lake staff and Glen Elder State Park. A lot of work has gone into this, but more importantly, the Historical Society has worked with wildlife and parks before, but we've never had such a great push. And I would like to have everybody give a huge applause to Glen Elder State Park, because really, this is what's making this happen. So I'd like to really thank them. So history, here we are, making history today. It's a great thing that we're in this setting, this beautiful setting, the Solomon Valley. The Solomon Valley has been an important region for thousands of years. Really, if we look back before humanity, we will see everything from camels that roamed out here. We have evidence of camel bones. We have evidence of a large ocean that covered this area. The ocean receded, and what we have is this beautiful valley. Glaciers came down, and humanity came here between 9,000 and 10,000 years ago. And they came from the west, and they went east, and they came across this land that looked so different to them 9,000 to 10,000 years ago that it had been this great safari, beautiful grassland, full of teeming buffalo, full of these gorgeous valleys of grass and seeds, and what else would you want to do but settle here, live here? That's why a lot of people have lived here for forever, really, what it seems like when you talk about thousands of years. And so with that being said, the Native Americans, the early tribes that came here, saw an importance in this land. Now, what we know, or what we see here is this beautiful body of water. They saw a huge mound that was developed during all those millennia of the oceans receding and everything. The springs, the Great Spirit Springs. And that Great Spirit Springs was a mineral springs that bubbled up from inside the earth and deposited this calcite, this material that became stone, and it built up over millennia. And it created a huge mound like you see on panel 1 in here. That mound and that water became so important to the tribes of North America. We see evidence from all over the United States, Canada, down into Mexico, where natives came here to worship. This was a place of spiritual importance. It was a place where they came to reflect. There was never any account of war here. It was always just a sense of community, of getting together for an education purpose, to tell their stories in oral tradition that would pass down from generation to generation to generation for thousands of years. And what evidence do we have? We have these beautiful burial mounds that are 5,000 years old up and down this valley. Burial mounds that tell a story. It tell a story about tribes that came here not just to worship, they had fun here. Right where we're sitting, this very location, there was a kind of a racetrack, if you want to say. Different games that were played by different tribes. they would run from the spring all the way down this path up into this area, and they were fun games. They were things that happened, but they happened for thousands of years. But they would always come back in the evening to pray, and that was the big thing. And I'm going to take a moment here to sing a song that's several thousand years old that respects the integrity of the springs, that respects the integrity of the religion. And this is something that we have to think about. It's like Amazing Grace is such a staple to religious and to the fact of the Christianity movement. But when you think about the native tribes and their thinking, they had all of these different forces, these natural forces that became gods to them. And the spring was a god. That's why they called it Waconda. Newakandaga means the spirit of the spring, the spirit that lives within. And even the Pawnee tribes, when they came to the Kansas, Pawnee actually means slave. The Pawnee were the slaves of the early Kansas tribe, and they brought them out here as slaves, and they put them up into the northern Republican Valley. But they came here to worship because they saw the importance, that oral tradition, that sense and feeling of place. And what they saw there was their almost heaven. Waconda Springs became a lodge. They believed all of the animal spirits, the beaver, the turtle, these totems lived. And that's where they lived, in those springs. So they came down to worship here, to find guidance. But more importantly, what they heard was this song. This is a Sonoan song from the Sioux tribes, an early tribe that talks about Waconda, the Great Spirit, the God. So I'm just going to sing a couple verses of that so that you guys can... I've got it hold, so... This drum was just donated to us by Sharon Sawfeld. It's a beautiful drum. It's done, yes. This is gorgeous. This drum's donated. It will be put in the cases here for use. It's meant to use. It's, all hand carved, done in a traditional way. The person who made it, Sharon?
Frank Marable.
Frank Marable, famous drum maker. Very traditional process. Elk is it is elk, isn't it? Yeah, this is elk skin. They made them out of horse, too. And a lot of it was that spiritual connection. And each person, as they make their drum, they put their self into this. So... Wonka tonka osha shila pila Elohe wichu sani wa kuelo pila Elohe Wonka tonka osha shila Wichu sani wa kuelo pila Elohe akshiwa Wakanda Elohe hayo. Aho, Great Spirit. So that is a song, ancient song, that talks about the sacrifice that the Great Spirit, all of our ancestors have made for us to be here in this moment. And that's what the natives believed. Every time they came back, it was honoring their ancestors, honoring the Great Spirit. And I kind of feel like we have that sense all the time when we come here, that peace, that serenity. Even though the Great Spirit Springs, it's underwater, this beautiful lake brings us back to that serenity. I think that's why a lot of people come for the recreation. It's a sense of togetherness and oneness. So it's a beautiful thing. I think.
If I played the drum, would you sing again?
Sing? Maybe later. Let me finish my program first. So one thing I want to talk about too here, the importance of the Solomon River. The original name for the Solomon River that came down through several tongues was the Nephihola. It literally means the water that flows from the mound. Thousands of years ago, when the people first came out of here, a lot of springs would flow down the Solomon, and there was always running water. But because of the springs here, it really, during that time, it would overflow and bubble into the Solomon, the Nephihola. And so the Waconda and the Nephihola had this beautiful relationship for thousands of years. And not only did that relate into later times with the pioneers coming out here, but it also reflected a lot with trappers and the explorers. And what we see as far as evidence, one of the first European explorers that came out here was the Malay brothers, Pierre and Paul, in 1739. They were French explorers that came out here along early trails that the natives had, and one of the earliest trails that the Pawnee then followed was the Pawnee Trail that came up. There's still evidence that came down to the springs and south. These beautiful bluffs out to the south, there's an intaglio, which means serpent mound. The serpent mound was a sign for the natives to kind of show where to go. It was a place that kind of was a trail marker as such. Well, those trappers and explorers followed those same trails. And that became important for the pioneers and the homesteaders later, because those trails became main bodies of movement across this nation. And one of our main trails that we've used a lot today is Highway 24. Well, Highway 24 starts clear back with these early exploring pioneers, Malay. Zebulon Pike. Pike's Peak's named after Zebulon Pike. Pike came through here. Several great explorers, but we don't see great settlement until the 1860s. By 1866, we already start to see a lot of Europeans coming after the Civil War here, and our second panel actually in the Cultural Center describes what they had to do to get here and what they had to do to accomplish to live here. And it was a task. It wasn't only that there was confusion from the native tribes of what was going on, but it was different, a complete different environment for them to come out here and bury themselves in sod dugouts to withstand heat like we experienced yesterday, and bury yourself in the ground for days on end and not try to go nuts. You try to think about coming out here and with little experience other than the military that was up and around here. And the military had a sense of what this whole area was like, because they scouted this trying to contain the Native Americans, basically, so that the Homesteading Act of 1861 could take place. So there was a lot of movement with natives and the troops in this area. And one of the earliest stone structures was built in 1867 or 1868, just out here in the lake. It was a stock blockhouse that the military built as establishment. A Dr. George Rose came from Indiana, and he had some issues with during the Civil War. He was a pretty good physician, I guess, had a family, but he left his family for a short time to come see what this was all about. Well, because of the military presence, we had all of these soldiers and we had these people that worked for the military, such as E.T. Carr. Carr Creek is named for E.T. Carr. Carr was a guy that scouted for the military. He and Captain DeRubio worked under Custer. There's a hill actually named just south of here. If you look straight south, you'll see Lowndes Hill. Lowndes Hill's the main hill that kind of bumps up to that. Behind that's Custer Hill. Custer's camped there during the winter. And so all of this military stuff, you had these people out here that were seeing all this beautiful land, all this potential for farming and for settlement. And the soldiers were the first. The soldiers left the military after they got out, and they came here and homesteaded. Captain DeRubio homesteaded just right by Waconda Springs. And then Dr. Rose homesteaded just west of there where the blockhouse was and the families. But what happened is you had this conflict. And conflict happens whenever one person's pushed into something they don't want to do. You know that feeling of, I don't want to be pushed around, you can't push me around. That's what happened. And so with the natives, they sent out these rejects, these called dog soldiers. They had done something in their tribe that was just completely immoral or bad behavior or murdered somebody, and they were rejected from the tribe. And being rejected from a tribe was hard. It was extremely tough because that meant you had to survive by yourself. And then those dog soldiers ended up banding together in groups of 40 and 50, 60, 70, and they just went out and terrorized the pioneers out here. And I really want to reiterate this and stress this. The Native Americans got a bad rap on this deal because really when we look back, we could have been a lot more passionate, charismatic towards what was happening, but it was a twofold thing. You had these tribes that were being pushed onto reservations against what they wanted, and then you had dog soldiers that were fleeing from there and really causing havoc. And that's what happened to some of these settlers between 1866 and 1870. Dr. Rose, I was just talking about, he rode his horse one night in 1869, left the blockhouse, wrote a story on it saying, hey, things are getting hairy here. I don't know whether I'm going to survive or not. He put all of his money in there. He left some belongings in the blockhouse, and he got on his horse and he rode this way to Limestone Creek, was just right over here. He was killed right over here on Limestone in 1869. They think natives did it, but it's also believed that white men might have killed him too just for his money and then blamed it on the natives. That happened a lot. We don't know. We'll never know. His body laid, and they buried him where he was shot. And he was shot with a rifle and for years. And then finally, some pioneers, after telling this story for years and years and years, said, we got to get Dr. Rose off the creek. And so they took him and placed him into Walnut Creek Cemetery. And that would be one of the first burials over there in Walnut Creek Cemetery is from Dr. Rose. So there's stories like that. Every quarter section here had a story similar to Dr. Rose's. Maybe not being attacked by whoever and murdered, but everybody had a story, and each story was unique. And one of the main unique stories that I kind of want to touch on, and I won't spend a lot of time today, but there was a lot of religious movements, and I talk about religious because the spiritual side of Waconda, I think, drew people of that sense of spirituality and freedom. And we had Quakers that came out here early on in the 1870s and homesteaded. And it wasn't just one Quaker group, there was a lot of Quaker groups. And Garlett Academy was a huge institution. It was a college started by the Quakers here. And they built a college. The third panel, or the second panel, goes into about the Quakers. But we're looking right at the Quaker settlement. Right across the lake on that bluff stood Garlett Academy, the first main Quaker institution in the state of Kansas. It was started in 1879, but it burnt down in 1895. These stories tell a lot about this land. The Quakers, the Mennonites that came, the Christians, there was churches all up and down this valley. And I think when I come back to seeing all of this research to come together on these four panels, it comes back to a sense of community, because what happens in this valley, because of the springs, people came to commercialize it, but it also drew people. It wasn't just like, well, we're going to bottle this water and sell it and make some money off of it. There might have been some of that tendency for commercialism, but it drew people from all over the world here continually. Not just the natives now. Now we've got Europeans and Africans and Chinese and all of these people from all over the world now coming. And that escalates up until 1884, and they build a hotel around the springs. And that hotel draws people, more and more people. And then by 1906, Dr. Abrahams purchased the hotel and really evolves it into a sanitarium-style complex with Dr. Bengesser. They have a whole staff of doctors. You could go get flushed from one end to the other, and it would cost you money. So it was a real good experience to some, and some people it was not a good experience. But it was something, if anybody that is here today can remember back, coming with your family to Waconda Springs, that's something that sticks in your head because it's something that was so unique. And that's stories I hear from all. I just got a call from a lady in Germany who was over here in 1958. And she asked me if there were still dancers out at the springs. And I said, well, the springs are gone. And I explained this whole tour. She had no idea about really them being gone and the lake was over the springs. She thought, well, the lake had just been built around the springs because this mound. But stuck in her head for years. She was only here for a few days back there. And so it's a unique thing that sticks in your mind about the springs and the hotel and as it goes on. But what happens during that time is people have to coexist with Mother Nature. And a lot of that comes down to flooding and flood control. And in 1911, we had one of the worst floods that human existence had seen or recorded. And it flooded so bad that it washed a lot of the homes that were built along the river out. Those homes were never reestablished. And another flood in 15. By 1941, when they had the 41 flood, that got people talking because farmers were not going to put up with losing all the ground and it being flooded out. And so they really started working with flood control. And that's when the Bureau of Reclamation started coming together and saying, well, we're going to start building dams in the state of Kansas. And that whole project of pushing forward, getting flood control is probably one of the most important things that this valley has seen in hundreds of years. This is a monumental project. When this was started after the 51 flood and it pushed through, there was a lot of pushback from farmers because farmers were losing their farm ground. But look what we have in the end. I think it's pretty spectacular. I think that this opportunity for the lake and everything here is just really amazing. And so we have all four panels basically touch base on all of this history. And as the history evolves and as we grow and learn more things about this region, it's going to go into an iPad that we've got in there, revolving displays. So it's going to evolve and change. And I think that it's remarkable. It really is. And where we're sitting, almost 50 years ago, really, Bob Dole was here. And he stood right out in front of that plaque. And he dedicated this in 1970 as a great project and a great thing for Kansas, and signified its history and recognized the thousands of years of existence here. And so I think it's fitting that 50 years later we're sitting here, an event that honors the past, that honors the future, and it honors Mitchell County citizens and Kansans. And I'm proud to be a Kansan. I think everybody that's here has some interest. So I encourage you to get involved. I encourage you to take a piece of history and work with it.